Welcome to the Arizona Nurses Association podcast series, Bridging Beliefs, where we take a closer look at the diverse end-of-life beliefs held by Arizona's communities. I'm Sandy DeJesus, chaplain at Honored Health, and I'll be your host as we explore how cultural values and spiritual perspectives shape the way patients and families experience end-of-life care. Whether you're here for your own personal educational growth or to earn nursing contact hours, thanks for joining us as we learn how to support patients with compassion and respect during this phase of life. To earn nursing contact hours, learners must listen to one or more of the podcasts in this series and submit an evaluation form. The Arizona Nurses Association is accredited as a provider of nursing continuing professional development by the American Nurses Credentialing Center's Commission on Accreditation. Stick around after the episode for details on how you can earn continuing education credit for listening to this episode and access our companion PDF summaries and quick guides for further learning and discussion. Welcome. Can you start by introducing yourself and sharing a little bit about your personal story?
My name is Reverend Dr. Deidre Walton, and my personal story is that I am a nurse. I also studied law, and my passion is providing culturally appropriate care and reducing disparities. And I'm also an itinerant elder in the African Methodist Episcopal Church, and I have been a pastor.
How do you and your family fit within the bigger picture of the cultural customs and background that you identify with?
My family is very diverse, and when I say they're very diverse, we have different races within our family, and we've embraced that, and we call ourselves Americans.
What other belief systems would most likely be present in your community or your culture?
In my community, belief systems is coming from culture, spirituality, and religion. My family's diverse, with Catholic, Protestant, and Jewish.
Okay, so quite diverse. In a setting where traditional end-of-life customs can be carried out, what does that process typically look like for those with different belief systems?
My response to that would be that you can't put a cookie cutter on it. It's very diverse, and it depends on what is the influence of their socioeconomic status and how they look at end-of-life care. And they've done research to show that SES, socioeconomic status, does influence how one plans, end-of-life care. Mm-hmm. And they look at their education. Blacks are more likely, the more education they have, and their income will be more likely to embrace and seek. But the lower socioeconomic status, there is still a disparity on end of life because they don't have the resources, the knowledge. And then again, faith-based is really critical as well, because whereas their white counterparts, they look at quality of life, where Black Americans or African Americans, people that identify as that, they look at prolonging treatment, and that's that whole concept of hope. And so that's why it's so important to partner with the faith-based community, because the pastor is really revered and respected in their opinion. And then trust is another one that has an effect on how they approach end-of-life care and the decisions that they make.
Given the diversity, are there specific rituals or ceremonies that are important that would come out for a patient or their family? Specific needs as far as the environment?
The ritual is prayer. That's why I talk about the faith-based, because they believe in the power of prayer and healing, because the scripture says so. And so that's why it's important for the providers to understand that, build that trust. They're more likely to accept even having the discussion, that they can have the hope, but also talk in reality of where they are.
What part do children play in end-of-life traditions in your community?
They're the legacy. The children are very important because they're going to carry on the history. And so telling them about their background, telling them about their history, telling them where they come from. I personally experienced that. I know so much about my family because I sat at the feet of my ancestors.
The stories are so important. How do these practices help provide comfort for the patient and for their loved ones?
The inclusivity, that really, families come together. I can give a personal experience with my family, everyone. We did not believe in putting our family member in a nursing home. We kept them at home. We would have a family meeting, and we included everyone, and everyone had a part in how we're going to handle grandma, how we're going to handle auntie, all of that. The inclusivity of the family members and coming together, that support system was so critical in the family. And that is not just for my family, and I can say that about the Black community. They come together to support one another. The term inclusivity is so important.
As far as the nurse's role in supporting families and patients, what are some considerations that are important to address there?
There's a higher expectation or a higher before a Black American, a person that identifies that because of the history in this country done with research, the Tuskegee, for example, and other things. If they trust their provider, then they're more likely to listen. And the nurse can help build that trust because the nurse is there at the bedside. The nurse is there to educate. The nurse is there to approach them and taking care of them. And when that trust is built, she or he is the link to that physician who has to tell them. It's important in doing that assessment of that patient. You need to ask relevant questions to identify how they identify, because you cannot just say because one have melanin to presume that they're Black, because it's more cultural related than racial related. Race is important, but it's the identification is very critical. So that's why a lot of the researchers are now saying, how do you identify? How does that person identify? Are they Black? And we have now with so many generations in the current generations of multiracial marriages.
What is the best way to ask about spiritual support needs for the family, for decision makers, to help foster the best end-of-life care?
The best way to approach is to ask them what their belief systems are. What are their belief systems and what support system do they have from the family? That information will help the provider and the nurse to begin that discussion of end-of-life care. That is so important, is to meet the patient where they are and not be judgmental. It could be Methodism, it could be Catholicism, it can be even Jewish. And it depends on the generations, first generation, second generation, third generation. It all depends on that, because if you are a first generation, you're going to still carry those cultures. Someone that identifies as a Hispanic and then they come to America, but they're going to come with that culture, that Hispanic culture, irregardless of the color of their skin. Too often, I think practitioners and providers, when they walk in a room, they unconsciously, that person is Black. And they may not be Black. They could be East Indian. There are dark-skinned East Indians. There are dark-skinned Hispanics, dark-skinned Native Americans. So I think it's insufficient to presume one's race. You need to really talk to the individual. How do they identify? Because that's going to follow whether or not they practice their religion, how they practice all of that. You can be from New Orleans, totally different in the way somebody here in Arizona, for example, that was born and raised in Arizona. All they know is the West Coast and then California. It all depends on how you were raised and how it was handed down to you. That's why I said the family is critical, and that faith base. If your parents took you to church, you grew up in that, then that's what you're going to embrace and identify with. You may change as you become more mature, but that foundation has been laid.
And along those lines, what are some common barriers like hospital policies or state laws or time constraints that might make it difficult to honor some of the end-of-life traditions?
The barriers currently in the United States is access, the lack of access so that they can even get into the system, so they can even learn about the resources and things like that. I think that is a current situation, and some studies done in 2024 on the Journal of Hospice and Palliative Care, they address that and they review that the access is so critical. Because they don't go in if they don't have insurance. They don't, right. So they're not talking to anyone.
What should a nurse do if the desires of the family aren't aligning with the desires of the patient?
In all hospitals, in the inpatient settings, they do have committees that can bring that together, because the patient's wishes, that's why the do not resuscitate is so important. And if they do not have one, provider talking with them and the nurse talking with them to explain what does it mean to do not resuscitate? What are their wishes if something were to happen? And bringing them together, being the liaison to bring the family in, because some families have multiple children, and not every one of those children of that parent agrees with the decision. So setting up power of attorneys so that when that time comes, who's going to make the decision for mom or dad?
Well, they can still communicate it.
Yes, while they can still communicate.
What community-specific resources can a nurse provide to patients and families for ongoing support?
Again, faith-based communities, because churches do have health programs within the church. Not just the nurse's role to do this. Despite laws, there is a critical realism that there is a disparity, so we need to partner with researchers, we need to partner with philanthropists, we need to partner with the faith-based community, coming together so that we can meet the needs of the patient.
Just some closing thoughts for you. What's one key takeaway that you would like nurses to remember when caring for patients?
It's a term I like to use. It's called ethnocentrism. It's not what you want. What is the patient wants? And meet your patient where they are and be the resource to bring them to the appropriate decision.
Where can nurses find resources to educate themselves about your culture's end-of-life practices?
I'm a strong believer in scholarly, peer-reviewed journals and articles. Okay. That is where I feel is the data. And that was mentioned earlier about the Journal of Hospice and Palliative Care, because when you do qualitative studies, you're going to look at the data and you're going to look at a broad spectrum.
Okay. Where can our listeners connect with you or learn more about your work?
I'm a member of the Black Nurses Association of Greater Phoenix. I am a past president of the National Black Nurses Association, and we are not just here in the United States, but we do have some chapters outside of the United States and members outside of the United States. And we are very committed to end-of-life care. And at our annual national conference, we have a hospice resource that comes and provide education, 2 days worth of education on end-of-life care. That is so important. It's expensive to age, but it's also expensive to die.
Well, thank you so much for your time and your gifts. Thank you for joining us to learn more about how to support your patients and their families during end-of-life care. A special thanks to the American Nurses Association for funding this important initiative, and to Grand Canyon University for generously providing access to the recording studio. This episode is part of a larger series exploring end-of-life beliefs across Arizona's diverse communities. We hope you'll tune in to our other episodes, available wherever you get your podcasts or through the Arizona Nurses Association website. To earn CE credit for this episode and to download companion materials, including a PDF summary of today's discussion and quick reference guides, visit us online at aznurse.org/podcast. Until next time, thank you for being part of this ongoing conversation.